Hey everyone, welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from May 31st, 2024, and I'm recording this early on Tuesday, November 26th, 2024. So yeah, you guys aren't going to get this to the 30th, but with Thanksgiving and everything, I had to do this early in the week. So if something changes between now and Saturday, I've already done all the work. So this is what you're getting. It'll be a little dated, but hopefully not too much. So, as always, we're looking back at the CBSI Hot Top 10 and the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics in the week. We use those two lists to judge what was moving in the market, what were people chasing, what books were jumping in value because of news or, just being a hot new cover, a hot new release. Was it buzz? Was it movie news? Was it option news? What was going on that caused these books to hit the list? And then we come back 6 months later to see how they're doing in the market now, to try to understand, okay, what factors were sustainable and what were not. Should you have chased these books? Should you have been patient? If you're somebody who thinks that I tend to be overly negative, this might be a week for you, as we have a little better performance this week. But let's dig in and see if we can learn from why some of these books did a little better than we typically get. So, first up, we have Ghost in the Shell, number 1, from 1995. This is a Dark Horse manga adaptation of this classic series from Japan. And this hit in the list because they announced a new animated series was coming. Raw copies were going for $35 on average. 9.8 was set in 260, 370. This was mostly, I think, talked about it as being a big jump in sales, but maybe not a huge jump in price, a little bit, and that's kind of shown up here as it's still a $20 to $40 book raw. 9.8 still sitting at 300. So we're going to call this steady and I'll be back. There are a few, you can do a little better than that 35 average now, but for the most part, it's right in that same range. Still doing really well. This is a classic series that a lot of people love. So if you're into manga, you might be interested in checking this one out. Next, we have Mad Max Fury Road, Furiosa number 1, first appearance of Furiosa, and of course, this was actually the week before the movie came out that it was hitting the list. $20 to $25 back then for a raw copy. Now it's a $5 to $15 book. Yeah, down in a trap on this one. This movie didn't get the reviews, I think it got pretty good reviews altogether, but it didn't get the, people didn't go see it the way they did Fury Road. Not really sure why. I didn't watch Fury Road till it was on video. I need to watch this one now that it's out and I can watch it. But yeah, didn't quite get the reception, and as a result, this book has dropped back to basically a really cheap book. Next, we have Masters of the Universe, number 1, the first solo miniseries or titled miniseries for the Masters of the Universe characters. Obviously, they had appeared before this in the DC Comics Presents. I forget the number now off the top of my head, but anyway, they'd appeared previously, but this was their solo series. Raw copies were going for $25, 9.8 was going for $275, and this was all based on that yes, we're going to make a movie, and there was some casting rumors and the director rumors, so they keep saying they're going to make this movie. I feel like I've been hearing this for as long as I've been hearing there's going to be a new Spawn movie, but that's where I was hitting the list again. Now it's a $10 to $30 book, 9.8, 2 to 300. So another kind of steady book. It's we'll call this also an I'll be back. There are definitely some deals here, but for the most part, setting in that same range. Next, we're going to move into covers. We got 4 covers this week. Plus that cover / bud, so 5, I guess. First up, we got Sonic the Hedgehog, number 69. The Nathalie Fordran, 1 in 10, was going for 15 to 20 back then, and now it's a $10 to $30 book, with most of the sales still in that $15 to $20 range. These Sonic books are weird. We've gotten a lot of these covers over the last couple of years that have hit this list. Typically, they don't do very well in the 6 month, but this one's still kind of sitting in that same range with a few sales still actually above the range it was before. So we'll still call this a steady and I'll be back because you can still also get it for like $10. But yeah, it's doing pretty well still in the market. Next, we have for like the third week in a row, Godzilla's 70th anniversary, number 1, the Art Adams 1 in 50. 2 weeks ago, we talked about it at a $150 book. Last week, it was a $250 to $300 book. By this point, it was a $300 to $430 book. And if you got in on it on that first week, you did good. Anytime after that, not so much. By this point, it was a dumpster fire, as it's now a $70 to $200 book. 9.8, 300. So at the bottom of what raw copies were going for back then. Yeah, it kept climbing, and we often talk about the second week peak being beyond what a book can sustain. In this case, it was the third week peak that was way, way beyond what the book could sustain. So next we have Ascencia, number 22, the J. Scott Campbell coupon mail-in cover that was a homage to his own Danger Girl cover from years and years ago. Last week we talked about this at $300 coming right out the gate. By this point, it was a $300 to $360 book, so it was actually going over $300. Now it's a $75 to $100 book, which for a coupon mail-in thing is really good. $75 to $100, just nowhere near what the craziness of when it first came out. 9.8, $200, again, really good for just a book that's really about the cover. But again, half of what it was going for, not quite, well, a little more than half of what it was going for raw copy back then. So yeah, another dumpster fire, another book that was no reason to chase it in the initial craziness. Next, we have Edge of Spider-Verse number 4, the W. Scott Forbes 1 in 50. This 1 in 50 was going for 60 to 80, so between double and triple ratio for the most part. Usually not a great sign. Now it's a $5 to $30 book, although there was a raw sale for 90 mixed in there. But all the other sales are like 5 to 30, like 5, 15, 20, 25, 19. You know, it's all right in that range. The $90 is a clear outlier sale. 9.8 is 150 to 170, which would be a little higher than the raw values. But overall, yeah, this is a dumpster fire. Despite that $90 sale, for the most part, you're not getting that 60 to 80 you spent for it back. Cover I kind of like, but definitely not one that was worth those crazy monies. With that, we're going to move in. And I know you guys are like, I thought he said it did better. We got 3 straight dumpster fires. Well, it starts doing better from here. Next, we got Doom number 1, the Addie Granoff trade dress variant. Last week we talked about the 1 in 100 of this cover that was the Virgin. This week the trade dress was hitting the list at $20. Raw copies are now 10 to 40, 9.8, 90 to 100. So this is actually up. It was averaging 20 back then. Most of the sales, the average here is probably closer to 30, even though there were a few sales all the way down to 10. Definitely an up and worth it kind of deal on this one. Book's still doing really well and still in demand. Kind of like Doom number 1, the A cover for this Jonathan Hickman one-shot, also still doing really well. Back then it was a $25 to $50 book. 9.8, pre-order 160. So that's maybe a little high, but now it's still a $25 to $50 book for a raw copy on this. It's sitting right where it's been. So we're going to call it steady and worth it. 9.8 has settled in at 75 to 120. So the pre-order was a little over the top. But overall, again, we're just going to, most of the sales are still raw copies, and we're going to, yeah, and it's sitting right in the same range that it was back then. Next, we have Blood Hunt, the red band, number 1, the red band edition. And this is just the regular A cover of the red band edition. So we've talked a lot in the last few weeks. We've had several of these Blood Hunt variants hitting the list, and people have been chasing these 1 in 25s and that kind of stuff with the horror homages. But this was just a regular one, and this was because people were actually enjoying the story back then. I don't know if people enjoyed how it finished up as well as they enjoyed how it started. I didn't hear as much chatter about it toward the end. But yeah, people were all in on this event. Raw copies were going for 10 to 20 back then. Now it's a $5 to $15 book, so still several sales at double ratio, even up to triple, but not what it was going back then. So down and I'll be back. 9.8 is only going to cost you $50 on this book. So, all right. With that, our one last buzz book was Wolverine number 36, and that was because issue number 1 of Wolverine came out, and this was the first appearance of Wolverine. So that was what was causing it to hit the list. Back then, raw copies were sitting around $50. 9.8 sitting around 200. And now we got an interesting dichotomy going here. So $50 for raw back then. Now raw copies are running $75 to $125. So that's way up. That's up straight cash on a raw copy of this book. All the sales significantly more than what the average was back then. Averaging around $100, or probably closer to 90 really when you break up the sales than 100. But yeah, up toward that $100 mark. 9.8s, which were 200 back then, are now 95 to 200. There's actually multiple sales of 9.8s, less than some of the high-end raw copy sales. So we're still going to call this up because most of the sales are the raw copies, but it's a little confusing what people are willing to pay for a raw copy versus a 9.8. Yeah, the 9.8s have stepped back. The raw copies have surged way forward. They're overlapping in the prices for a lot of sales. Not something we see that often, but that's what's going on with this one. Overall, though, we're still going to call it up and worth it. Only because we're only going with worth it instead of straight cash because of the step back on the 9.8s. All right, next we had one DCU book, sort of. James Gunn likes to read comics, and he likes to tweet about comics that he read and enjoyed, whether they have anything to do with the movies he's making or not. And he read and talked about Wonder Woman Dead Earth, and so people were like, there was a huge bump of people going to chase this, thinking it might lead to something in his DC movies. He's basically said no, he just really enjoyed the story, and that's not necessarily where he's going with the Wonder Woman side of things. But anyway, there's a huge number of sales. Raw copies were only going for like $7, so it wasn't a huge jump in price. 9.8, $145. Don't know if that's sustainable because there's been no recent 9.8 sales, but raw copies are $5 to $20, with most of the sales $10 to $20. So this book is actually also up and worth it. I don't know if people have really, because of this and other reasons, I've heard this is a really good read. I actually have the trade. I have not sat down and read it yet. If it's just because people are really enjoying the story that it's sustaining these higher prices. But yeah, this one's up and worth it, despite the fact that there doesn't actually appear to be any real spec on this in terms of a movie. All right, we only had one MCU sort of related book, and that was Supervillain Team Up number 14, the first meeting of Doom and Magneto. And this was basically rumors about Dr. Doom casting that were completely wrong, as it turned out, because we've gotten that casting since. And also some rumors about the X-Men were going to be a part of it. And so anyway, there was some stuff going around that Doom and Magneto might be a part of where they were going with some of these future movies. Now that Kang is kind of out of the picture. Raw copies were going for $30 back then. 9.6 went for $175. Now it's a $10 to $50 book raw. 9.6, $175. So this is as steady and worth it as you could get. Average is right at the same. 9.6s are going right for the same. So yeah, this 1977 kind of classic villain team up is still doing pretty well. So if you bought in, you're doing just fine. So next, we got several X-Men 97 books still, even though the series was over at this point. It had been over for a couple of weeks. We were still all about X-Men 97 and our specking for what we would see in Season 2. First up, we got X-Factor number 19, the second cover appearance of Apocalypse. Everybody was all in on Apocalypse, even though if you go back and watch the original show, he was supposed to be erased from all time, but yeah, he's showing up again. So raw copies were $10 back then. 9.8 went for $63. Now raw copies are $5 to $20, with 10 being pretty close to the average. Only one 9.8 sale at $80, so slightly up, but overall we'll just call this steady and I'll be back. This is kind of what this book goes for anyway. It wasn't really up, it was just a lot of sales. And it's still kind of sitting right in that same place. Next, we have X Factor number 24, first cover appearance of Archangel. We've already gotten Archangel as a Horseman of the Apocalypse in the original X-Men series as well, but people were specking on this too because Apocalypse. Raw copies 25 back then. Now it's a $10 to $40 book. 9.8, 140 to 175. Again, a very steady price on this because really the price it was hitting the list because there was a lot of sales. It wasn't because the price was really moving. The price has been pretty steady over this, even though the sales numbers have stepped back. This is a book that a lot of people enjoy anyway just because of the character. I don't know that it's going to appear in X-Men 97 unless they're kind of redo this whole story arc with Apocalypse that they did previously. Don't know. Next, we have X-Men 97 number 2, the second print animation variant on the list for the second week in a row. We talked about it last week. It's a $10 to $18 book. This cover of Rogue and Gambit people were going crazy for. Now, by this point, it was a $15 to $30 book, so it had jumped up quite a bit. Now it's a $10 to $20 book, 9.8, 70 to 90. So it's down in and I'll be back. It's taken a slight step back from what it was, but still, for just a regular variant, getting pretty good money at $10 to $20 this month, 6 months out. Okay, we're going to keep going. We got X-Men, Uncanny X-Men 161, The Origin of Magneto. We kind of put this as, Tom put this as X-Men 97 spec, just because it was an X-Men related book, and there wasn't really any other reason for it to necessarily be hitting the list. Back then, the average was 50. I didn't do, as you've noticed, I didn't say here, this was a week I didn't do cash or trash, so I didn't get a chance to check them back then if this average for a 1982 book was really accurate or not. But they're saying it was 50, 9.8, only 130, makes me question that a little bit. But now it's a $5 to $20 book, 9.8, 115, only one sale. So down in a trap if you were paying like $50 for this. I don't know if that's truly that accurate, but definitely down, and I'll be back if nothing else. So, and then our last book was Uncanny X-Men number 266. The second appearance, first cover appearance of Gambit. I'm not going to go, we've been through that issue a billion times. This is the book that people want. Whether it's technically his first appearance or not, this is the book people want. Raw copies back then were 100 to 150, and 9.6. Key thing is here, I'm not sure why they reported the 9.6 prices, but I think that because they were going for like highs, 245 to 300. Now raw copy is 50 to 175, 9.6, 235 to 275. So we'll call this a steady and I'll be back. You could argue maybe it's that borderline between steady and a down and I'll be back. But there's enough overlap in both of these that, yeah, we'll go with steady, I'll be back for this first cover appearance of Gambit, the book that people want for Gambit. And this is really based on people speculating that they're going to bring him back in the next season. So that is this week's list. We had 18 books to talk about. I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we will catch you next time. Later.